Hi everyone, welcome. This is the Afterlife Pod with Nick Dove. Hope you're comfortable, hope you're calm, hope you're relaxed, and here we go for another journey into the afterlife or next dimension or back home, whatever you want to call it. This one's called Face to Face with Jesus the Christ. I'm a 60-year-old combat veteran from the Vietnam War, from North Carolina. My story begins in 1999 when I visited a friend in Virginia Beach. My friend is a 70-ish-year-old Christian lady who appears to have what is commonly referred to as psychic abilities. To those who would argue that a person couldn't be a Christian and a psychic at the same time, I beg to differ, but report my truthful experiences with her below. Suffice to say that my friend can see and or intuit things that most ordinary people can't. I've known her since 1974, and she's been a good friend over these many years. She is a very goodly and God-revering woman who studies the scripture and prays to our Lord daily. When I visited her in 1999, she advised me, "You have lung cancer and you're going to die." Because she has always been so accurate in the past, I took this advice seriously and immediately reported to the Veteran Affairs Medical Centre and asked for a physical examination. I'll never forget when the nurse on duty asked me if I had ever had an Agent Orange exam. And when I replied that I had not, she scheduled one for me. The Agent Orange physical examination affirmed my friend's prognosis, and I was subsequently referred. Physicians performed surgical testing and advised me that my cancer was in stage 3B and incurable. They told me, "Go home, get your affairs in order, because you're going to die, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it." Not wanting to accept this dire prognosis, I boarded a plane and went for a second opinion. The physicians there told me that the doctors had lied to me about the stage of my cancer. They said my cancer was actually in stage 3A. There's a big difference in the staging because the National Cancer Institute advises that a stage 3A cancer may be a candidate for surgery, and while a stage 3B cancer is not eligible for surgery. However, the physicians advised me that otherwise the other physician's prognosis was pretty much the same, and that in any event I was probably going to die. Fortunately, another friend who happened to be a social worker called and told me that he had been in touch with some other oncologists and doctors, and that they had expressed being open to seeing me despite my lack of medical insurance. I boarded the next flight home, where the fine medical personnel examined me. The doctors and social workers found a clinical trial that I qualified for, and they offered me treatment paid via the auspices of Medicaid. Together with 11 others who shared the same stage of cancer as me, entered a clinical trial. Long short story is that I had a remarkable reaction to the chemotherapy, as it all but eliminated the 5.5 centimetre malignant tumour which had been growing in my left lung. While the chemo didn't totally and completely eliminate the cancer, it did eliminate enough of it that the surgeons came to me one day and said they would be willing to perform surgery in an attempt and with the hope of saving my life. Initially visualizing that he would only have to take about half of my left lung. Once he went in there, however, the head surgeon realized he would have to take the whole thing, which he did. All went well, and I seemed to heal up. Then about a month later, the doctors discovered I had developed a fistula, and they would have to go back in and repair it. A fistula is a hole in the bronchial tube from where the bronchial tube had been severed in the removal of my lung. The good doctor said that he had to advise me that the fistulas are the number one cause of post-surgical mortality following a lung removal. So a month after undergoing my first lung removal, I had to have more surgery in that area. This time, however, I died on the operating table. This is when my beautiful, albeit incredible and miraculous story really begins. Lying on the operating table, I awoke following my surgery. When I opened my eyes and looked across the operating room, the first thing I noticed was that the entire surgical team, which consisted of about 7 doctors, were grouped together in a football-like huddle on the far side of the operating room. Listening intently, I could hear one of them talking, and the more I listened, I realized that they were praying for me. Then, all of a sudden, one of my prayerful surgical team members turned and looked directly at me. Apparently, he'd noticed that my eyes were wide open and I was looking back at him, because the next thing I remember is that he excitedly shouted out loud, "He's alive!" And with that, they all broke huddle and came rushing back over to my bedside. They were all very busily checking their medical instruments and at the same time telling me how surprised they were to see me alive, because I had died and that they'd tried everything they could think of to revive me, all to no avail. Finally, abandoning their attempts to revive me, they decided to gather together across the room and pray for my soul. Now, back at my bedside, and for about the next 20 to 30 minutes, they systematically went about checking the machine, reading, and doing whatever doctors do with a patient who's in recovery. Eventually, one by one, they all wandered off to their other chores. All but one, that is. This one doctor stayed by my bedside and eventually looked down at me and said, "You're probably wondering why I'm still standing here." To which I replied, "You want me to tell you some more about my dying?" And then he said, "No, that's not the reason why." So I asked him, "Well, what's up, Doc?" He said, "I've been performing these same procedures for the last 20-something years, and something happened here today that I've never experienced before. It's had such a profound effect on me that I feel that I have to tell you about it." So I said, "Okay, go ahead." He started, Well, we had you wide open and we were removing some kind of fat tissue from your heart to use to tie up your fistula when all of a sudden you started talking out loud. Surprised, we all jumped back from the table as we initially thought that you had somehow perhaps come out from under the anesthesia. But when we checked our instruments, we found that no, you were still under, still unconscious. So we just stood there and listened while you talked. So I said, well, what did I say? Because I had no recollection of anything like this going on. The doctor replied, it's not so much what you said, it was to whom you were talking to. So I said, well, who was I talking to? The doctor said, you were talking to Jesus Christ. When he said this, I just didn't know what to say. I thought, gee, that's not very funny. Why would this doctor say something like this to me? Looking deeply into his eyes, I could see that he wasn't joking. He was quite serious. He looked somewhat shaken up. So I quietly said, well, was he talking back to me or was I just hollering out into this void? The doctor said, we couldn't hear any other voices, but it sounded like you two were engaged in a two-way conversation. Then he added, by the way, I'm going to make sure this gets into your medical records. With that, I thanked him, and he went on his way. About 10 days later, I was mended up enough to be released from the hospital, and I went home. I would all but forget about this event until about a month later, when I travelled back to this area to visit my psychic spiritual friend. When she entered the room, she froze on the spot and stared at me with a look of total astonishment. She said, you're all lit up. You've got lights protruding out from all around and over you. You have angels flying all around your head. She crossed the room sideways, never taking her eyes off me. She had an absolute look of astonishment on her face. She eventually made it to her desk and sat down intently staring at me. Without saying anything else, just staring, she began to cry. Tears began streaming down her face. I didn't quite know what to think about this, but her behaviours began to affect me. Then she very quietly said, you know that you died last month on the operating table? I said, yes. The doctors told me that I did. Then she really rocked my world by saying, well, did they tell you that you had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus Christ himself? I almost fainted. But instead, I managed to reply, yes, they did tell me, but they couldn't tell me what he had to say. Do you know what he had to say? She said, yes, I heard the whole thing. To which I replied, well, you certainly got my attention. What did he say? She replied, I'm going to tell you what he said, but first I need to tell you something first. I said, okay, go ahead. She continued, when you last came to see me last year, I told you that you had cancer and that you were going to die. That was it. That was your life expectancy. You're not supposed to be here right now. I just wanted you to know that. Now, I'll tell you what happened, what he said, and why you're still here. I replied, please do tell me. She said, when you died and left your body, you screamed out at the top of your voice that you were sorry if you had ever hurt anybody in any way while you're on earth. You screamed it out so loud and with so much emotion and conviction that you startled everybody that was around you at the time. He just happened to be over there, and he came over to where you were to see what all this commotion was about, she said. You jumped in front of Jesus Christ and started talking your head off. You didn't even realize who he was, but you just started telling him that you had just gotten out of prison and were undergoing treatment for cancer, and that you are now getting a big government disability check for exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam, and would never have to go back to work again, and that you weren't ready to die. You wanted to go back to Earth and have some fun. You got them all laughing. It was then that he reached over and touched you and instantaneously cured you of your cancer and sent you back to your body. You are now going to live for another 26 years. Do you want to know what you're going to be doing for the next 26 years? I naturally replied, yes, please tell me. She said, you are going to spend the rest of your life helping others who have similar experiences that you've had. You want to know why you're going to be doing that? I again said, yes, why? And then she said, because that's all you really want to do is help others. Isn't that wonderful? She had stopped crying and was now smiling. She said, you're going to tell a lot of people about what's happened to you, but very few are going to believe you. But I believe you because I've seen and heard it with my own eyes and ears. I've been giving these readings to people for the past 40 years. And you are the only person I've ever seen, other than myself, who has ever had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus Christ. That incident took place in the year 2000. Since then, my cancer metastasized to my neck in 2003, and this elevated my case to stage 4 lung cancer. Once again, I attempted to get the needed medical help for my service-connected disease, and once again was refused help. Instead, they refused to offer me surgery because there was simply no chance of a cure. So once again, faced with the prospect of dying because of not being treated, I had no alternative other than to return to the fine folks elsewhere and receive the necessary surgery yet again via Medicaid. Immediately following the surgery, however, my surgeon came to me to advise me that he had been unable to remove all of the cancer, and there were still some cancer cells left in my body. Remembering what my psychic friend told me 3 years earlier about my living for another 26 years, I simply smiled at the good doctor and thanked him for doing his best. When I had another CT scan a couple of months later, I was cancer-free. Not believing their eyes, the doctors had advised me to have CT scans every 90 days since. It is now 5 years later. I am writing these memoirs feeling fine and thanking the Lord for every day that I'm alive. In 2005, I returned to school and obtained a Master's of Social Work in hopes of helping others. My cancer fighting experience was definitely one that changed my life. Well, the above story isn't the only instance in which I've noticed the divine influence in my life. It's undoubtedly the most dramatic. As a footnote, I would like to note that of the original 12 participants that were initially entered into the clinical trial in 2000, I am the only one still alive today. I thank you for taking the time to read my story. I tell someone every day of my experience with Jesus Christ and how he touched me and cured my cancer. I especially like telling my story to other cancer patients, as my story seems to impart a sense of hope and faith in those facing death. I like to think that my story gives solace and comfort to others who are told, "You have cancer and you are going to die, and there isn't anything you can do about it." I've now experienced another NDE last year. In May 2007, I had a heart attack. My mother called an ambulance and I was rushed to the hospital. I wasn't getting arterial oxygen and was placed on a BiPAP machine. My bodily functions like my heart rate and vitals, etc., were being watched as I was hooked up to a myriad of monitors. The lights to my hospital room were off, but my door was slightly cracked open. I'd been reading a book entitled A Search for God, and I decided to close my eyes and pray. When I shut my eyes, I noticed a small pinpoint of light behind my closed eyelids and decided to focus on it as I prayed. As I began to recite the Lord's Prayer, the light began to grow bigger and get brighter. It grew and became brighter and brighter and brighter until my whole head was filled with this light. It had begun as a small little speck, but grew so large and bright that I couldn't look at it anymore. It hurt. It was bright. It was incredibly bright. I opened my eyes and noticed that I was out of breath. I was breathing very hard like I had been running and was out of breath. I was incredulous, very excited about what I'd just gone through. A doctor or male nurse stuck his head in my room and I excitedly began to tell him about the light. He then noticed that my BiPAP machine had come off and I was lying beside my bed. He asked me how long the BiPAP had been off, and I said, "Never mind the BiPAP, you've got to hear about this light. I want to tell you about the light." That's all I could think about. He said that he would hear about the light later, but needed to know how long the machine had been off. When I told him that I didn't really know, he turned the lights on and called in the other staff. None knew anything about how long the machine had been off, but they noticed all of my vitals on the computer monitors that I was hooked up to seemed to be in the normal range. In other words, I was breathing normally and getting all the oxygen that a normal person would be getting. In short, I didn't need the machine anymore. In closing, I feel like I've been in the presence of God and felt like it on this occasion, and that I again was instantaneously healed. The nurses told me when I was discharging that they had a bet going on as to whether I'd live or not when I first came into their ward. Well, I don't think that this can be considered to be a near-death experience, at least not like the one in which I actually did die back in the year 2000. I was certainly close to death. Before being discharged, I was taken into the surgery and given a heart stint. They told me that one of my arteries was blocked and that was the reason for my heart attack. In any event, both of my experience happened in hospitals and both can be verified. My life today isn't anything like it was before I'd begun having these near-death experiences. Thanks for reading my story. That's the end of that experience. I quite like that one. It was different. So, unlike most near death experiences that I read out on this show, this didn't have any detail whatsoever on this guy's recollection on what happened when he died. He had to rely on what other people told him, which makes it even more miraculous, I think. He had to wait for what the doctor said happened. Like the doctor said, you were talking to someone and it appeared you were talking to someone who it was Jesus Christ. And this was confirmed by his other friend, the psychic lady, who said, she heard this conversation or was able to remotely view it somehow. It doesn't really go into specifics as to how she knew exactly what the conversation between Jesus and the man on the hospital bed was about, but apparently it seems she heard it. I don't know how, but I guess this is how psychics work. So I'll go through it again just for those who, didn't quite get it the first time or tuned out a bit, as tends to happen when you are listening to a podcast and you are listening to someone reading something. I know it happens with me. I hear someone reading something and I find myself drift off a bit, and sometimes it's better when you actually hear the person retelling it in their own words or just going through the main points. So this guy is a Vietnam veteran. He is from North Carolina, and he is having this experience where he is, this story is in 1999, so yeah, a long time ago now, about 24 years ago, and he is visiting a friend of his who's a psychic or very intuitive, and he says she's also very religious, reads the scripture every day and prays to God every day, and he goes to visit her, and the first thing she says is, "Oh my God, you've got lung cancer. You're going to die." Now this guy says he hasn't been to a doctor before about this. He doesn't say if he's showing any symptoms. He just says he goes and visits his friend, and this is what his friend says. So he says that he has seen her predict things and say some pretty weird things, and that have come true in the past. So he takes her on her word here. He trusts that she is picking something up that he's yet aware of. So the first thing he does is go to the veterans doctor. Now I don't really understand how the American healthcare system works, but this guy seems to go through a few different routes to get the treatment he needs, and I think first he tries this veterans hospital, and at this place they say, I guess this is treatment that is free for ex-vets, and yeah, so and I don't know if that affects the quality of the medical people who are treating him, but anyway, this is what happens. He goes to these people and they say, okay, you've got a stage 3B cancer, and that is incurable. I don't know much about cancers and the stages they go in either, but clearly this is obviously an advanced stage, and it's also in his lungs, and it's caused by a pretty toxic chemical, Agent Orange. So yeah, it's not looking good for him. And then he gets this news that this psychic lady's confirmed to him that she said, you have got lung cancer and you're going to die. So the first part's come true. He has actually got lung cancer, and this has been confirmed by the doctors. But he is determined to fight on, and he decides to go and get a second opinion. And the next set of doctors say, look, you've got lung cancer and you're going to die, but it's only in stage 3A at the moment. So it's still pretty severe news and pretty heartbreaking for him, but at least there's a little bit of glimmer of hope from this set of doctors, because they are saying the cancer, although it is going to kill him, isn't at the advanced stage the first set of doctors did say it was at. So, and when it's not at this advanced stage, apparently, according to the rules, there is surgeons who will operate when it is only at stage 3A, whereas if it is at stage 3B, like the first set of doctors said, then that is considered inoperable and basically it's all over. So I guess, it's still pretty devastating news from him. He's either got 3A or 3B stage lung cancer. He doesn't, depending on which set of medical experts you take the advice from, and either way, it's not a good prognosis. So he's running out of options, and then he decides to try something called Medicaid in America. Like I said, I'm not really sure what that is. I guess it's sort of like a public health system, or a fallback for people who can't afford to pay for treatment over in America. I'm not too sure. I'm just guessing. Because in Australia we have a public, well, we have both. We have private and public health, but yeah, I won't get into that debate. So yeah, this third option for him is more like a clinical trial. So it really is last resort, I guess, when you have to resort to a clinical trial in the hope of getting better. So he and 11 other people start this trial, and miraculously he is able to get his tumour basically reduced. It's like a 5.5 centimetre tumour, and after the treatment it is basically gone. He says almost completely eliminates it. And so yeah, he has a first little miracle. This is the second miraculous intervention in the story, I guess. The first one is being told he has cancer in the first place by someone who isn't even a doctor, who hasn't even examined him. She can psychically tell he's not well. And this is the second miraculous thing that has happened to him. He is on his last resort. Two sets of different doctors have said, look, you're going to die from this thing. There's nothing anyone can do. So he goes to this third place, and it's a trial, and miraculously this trial saves his life, and he becomes cancer free. So to totally remove the cancer, though, this treatment is able to shrink it a lot, but not totally get rid of it. So to totally remove it, they decide to remove the lung entirely. So he has only got one lung left. And during this procedure, um, something happens as they're cutting it out. It's called a fistula. I've never heard of it either. It's like a hole in the bronchial tube from where the bronchial tube has been removed, where the lung has been removed. So it's some sort of complication there with the surgery. It's it's something that I can't quite picture in my head, but yeah. Anyway, it's just something that has created a problem, and he is told by the doctor that fixing this sort of thing up is one of the leading causes of death in surgery, when in post-surgical treatment of this problem. So he goes into another operation knowing that his life is, again, he might not wake up from this. He's a brave man. He doesn't talk much about how he's feeling before these surgeries, or what his theory is on what happens when you die, or what's going on in his life around this point, or how spiritual he is. He's telling this story pretty much matter of factly. There's no real emotion or conversation about what's going on his life attached to it. It's simply, this is how it is, and he gets on with it. And he says that after, during this surgery is when the miraculous story begins. Like I just explained, though, I beg to differ. Um, I think he's already had a couple of miracles along the way in this little experience. So he's lying on the operating table. He's just had this surgery to fix up this thing called the fistula in his lungs, and he opens his eyes. He's awake. The surgery's over. This isn't him in spirit form. This is him in body form. And the first thing he sees with his eyes after he opens his eyes is these 7 doctors, and they're standing together in the corner of the room, having a bit of a huddle. And as his senses slowly come back to him, and he can slowly begin to pick up exactly what they're saying, he begins to say, "Hang on a second, they're actually praying for me. They're saying a prayer for my life, and here I am alive. I'm in my body. I can hear exactly what they're saying." Now, at this point, I thought, well, he's just died, and he is watching these doctors from his spirit form, and he is no longer in his body. But this isn't the case. This is why it is a bit of a unique experience. He's doesn't explain anything about what happens in the afterlife. He's literally back in his body, and he's just like you and me are in our human forms, and he's able to hear what these doctors are saying, and they are praying for him. Then he locks eyes with one of these doctors in the middle of this huddle, and this doctor looks shocked and rushes over to him, and as he does that, all these other doctors rush over at the same time, and they begin checking his vitals, checking his oxygen, checking his breathing, checking his heart rate, and checking his blood pressure, just to make sure he's still there. And he's kind of wondering, okay, what is going on here? Why are they so, why are they doing all this stuff? Like, what's exactly happening to me? And then the doctors begin to realize, look, this guy's fine. He's survived. He's alive. He's back with us. And they walk away and get on to the next patient. And one doctor, however, stays behind and decides to have a bit of a chat with this man having this experience, and says, okay, so why do you think I'm still here? Like, do you know what has just happened? And the patient is obviously confused. He's like, what's up, doc? Is everything okay? And the doctor says, okay, so I've been doing surgeries like this for the last 20 plus years, and I've never seen anything like what I've just seen with you today. And the patient is surprised. He says, okay, so what happened? And the doctor says, okay, so we totally knocked you out. You were under the effects of the anesthesia. You weren't cognitive. You weren't, talking. You were totally out to it. And then while we're about to cut a bit of muscle away from your heart to use as a bit of tissue to tie around this bit we are doing surgery, this bit of your lung we're doing surgery on, you start just talking out loud all of a sudden, just as though you were awake. And then the doctor says, okay, and to make it even weirder, you said you were talking to Jesus Christ, and it was like you were having a conversation. It was something I'd never seen before, and it was quite shocking, because we made sure your medication was should have been totally knocking you out, and it's just a miraculous thing that I've never experienced in my time as a doctor. And the patient says, well, I don't have any recollection of that, but I have no reason to believe you would be lying about this. And the doctor says, yeah, it definitely happened. I'm going to make sure I put this into your medical records. And he's just blown away, this doctor. He cannot believe that he has just seen this happen. And I'd like to know more about what was actually heard by this doctor and what the conversation was about. But Yeah, I guess the psychic fills in a little bit of this information here. So he forgets about this. He's he's a pretty he's hard to shake. This guy. He doesn't let much bother him. He's just seems to be all about just getting on with it. And this Jesus experience doesn't have much of an effect on him as of yet. I guess maybe he just doesn't fully believe exactly what has happened, that he has pretty much died and had a conversation with Jesus, and this has brought, his spirit has had a conversation, and maybe he just doesn't accept that this has fully happened. And then he goes to catch up with his psychic friend, where this whole story began in the first place. Once he's recovered from hospital, and walks in the room, and boom, she just sees him and looks at him, and she's totally astonished. She sees angels flying around his head. That she sees that he's all lit up. He's got lights protruding out from all over his body, and she's just incredibly amazed at what she is seeing and cannot believe it, and she begins to cry. And she says to him, "You know that you died last month on the operating table?" And he goes, "Yeah, the doctors told me." And then she says to him, "You know you had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus." And this guy is absolutely blown away, because he says he's never spoken about this to her, and somehow she knows that this has happened. And he says, "Yeah, okay, yeah, that did happen." And she's like, "Okay, do you want to know what you guys talked about?" And he's just absolutely blown away. But first she says, "I just want to tell you that when I first told you you had lung cancer and you were going to die, you were supposed to die. That was supposed to be it for you. From what I saw in my psychic visions, you were not supposed to live a day longer. You were supposed to die in that surgery, like I said." So she's clearly implying here that something miraculous has happened during this guy's surgery, and this is why he didn't die on the spot. So he begins to realize, okay, so she continues on. She says, "When you died, you just screamed out with such emotion and conviction that it just startled everyone around you, that you weren't ready to die yet." And then he gave everyone in heaven a bit of a laugh. He said, "Okay, I'm not ready to die yet, because number one, I've just gotten out of prison. Number two, I've just beaten cancer. And now number three, I've got a big government disability check on the way for exposure to Agent Orange. So I want to go back to Earth and have some fun with that money." And yeah, it's the part where he's just screaming to someone that he's screaming to someone, and he doesn't quite know who this figure is. And the psychic lady says he's actually talking to Jesus Christ in this experience. Um, and she says that the conversation was about him coming back to Earth. He's got another 26 years from this experience left to live, and what he's going to do is basically help others, and this is why he's been given another chance to come back here and you know live his purpose, I guess, to get back here and help others going through similar things. And this brings a smile to both of their faces, and they're quite ecstatic that this is the reason that he's come back. She says this psychic friend that she, in her 40 years of giving readings as a psychic and medium, she's never met anyone other than herself who has had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus. So yeah, it's not exactly a common thing to happen for a conversation to occur, I guess, between a person or a soul and Jesus, and for someone to actually remember it or be reminded of it. I don't know when this experience was written, but this encounter with Jesus where he said you have 26 years left, happened in 1999. So what is it now? 2023. So yeah, that's 24 years ago. So the writer of this should still be with us. I don't know when these stories are published. It doesn't give much information about that. But yeah, I guess if the story is true, he's still got a couple more years left on Earth with us in physical form anyway before he goes back to Jesus or whoever he's going to meet up with in the next dimension. And then the story continues because he is told a couple of years later that he has got cancer again. So this Agent Orange stuff, it sounds pretty nasty, and you can see why it's been banned now. I don't know if this is why the cancer has come back, but clearly it's not good for human health, this Agent Orange stuff. And he is back on the operating table with another fight for his life. And this time he is able to. I'm just trying to read what happens this second time. Yeah, so he has surgery again, and the cancer gets removed. And the doctor, doctor tells him when he wakes up, look, I couldn't get all of the cancer, but the patient says, look, I'm not concerned because I've been told I have another 26 years left. So this is 3 years into that 26 years. So he's very, very confident in what his psychic friend is telling him. Again, he believes her over what the doctors are saying. So yeah, he wakes up from this surgery, and this is what the doctor says, and then he's advised to get tested regularly for cancer, and his next test shows that the doctor was wrong again, and all these cancer cells have gone away. So yeah, he continues to live and fight another day, and then in 2007, his health problems continue, and he has a heart attack, and this is where he has more of a NDE regular listeners to this podcast would be able to relate to. He shuts his eyes, he has this heart attack, he shuts his eyes, and he notices a small pinpoint of light in his closed eyelids, and he decides to focus on this while he prays to God. And as he does this, the light gets bigger and bigger and brighter and brighter, and it just becomes huge that it fills his whole head. And it was such a small speck to start with, and now it just has grown so light, so bright and light, he can't even look at it anymore. In fact, he says it hurts to look at this light, unlike a lot of near-death experiences who see this light that is intensely bright and powerful, brighter than looking at the sun. But in most cases, this doesn't hurt. It's just it's a welcoming light. It's a warm light. It's a light you want to be around with. I know from my experience on a day-to-day basis that I prefer it when it's overcast, because even when the sun's out a little bit, I just get allergies. I start sneezing. The sunshine. It's like I'm allergic to it. So I can relate to what these people who have these experiences say when they're actually surprised they can enjoy this sunshine and light and be in it. I know I see people in human form, obviously, who just love the sun, and I guess I'm a little bit jealous of that because they welcome it, and they just live for it. You see the forecast, and people will say, "Look, we're looking forward to a beautiful sunny day," but I personally prefer the opposite. I think that an overcast, wet, rainy day is a beautiful one. So he's had this heart attack and this near death, and now he's noticing this bright light, and it's just coming larger and larger the more he prays to God. But that's about all the detail he goes into. He just suddenly wakes up from that, and he's able to recall what has happened, and he feels that he was in the presence of God. And it wasn't much of a near death experience in terms of detail, but he feels that this was more profound experience because he actually felt that connection with the light, whereas the first one, where he's talking to Jesus, he had to be told that this is what happened by his psychic friend and the doctor, who said, you suddenly woke up in the middle of your surgery and was talking to Jesus. So in this case, he gets a bit of a taste of what the afterlife was like on a personal level. And now he's, like I said, I don't know when this account was written, but his last, health / near-death experience was in 2007. So he just says his life's been going on, and he's been doing what he said he'd do, and helping others, and talking to those people who have got cancer, and those people have been diagnosed with, cancer that's going to more than likely than not, kill them. So he says by being with these people and reliving his near-death experience, and this is able to give them a bit of hope, and in terms of them possibly being able to get better, even if the doctors have said they can't. And I guess it also gives them a bit of hope and faith that there is more to this existence than what a lot of people can think in this current world we live in, because spirituality seems to be, put on the back burner a bit, and especially when you look at more extreme angles of spirituality, I guess like near-death experiences, they aren't recognised by scientific fields, although there are starting to be a few papers come out about this stuff, and more research done on consciousness. There's still a long way to go before it's accepted as normal and mainstream in our society, but I think by doing our own research and listening to these sort of things, it's going to help you personally, but us as a species embrace this more, and that can only be a good thing, because there's no harm in understanding more about what happens after we cross over. I think it's a good thing to know more about that. All right, let's have a minute or so of quiet peace, and then I'll wrap it up. So the more I talk about this topic, and the more open I am about it, the more you start to realize that people have had these experiences on all sorts of levels. Like, I was talking to this lady yesterday, and she was saying that it's not a profound experience. It's just I guess it could be profound. It just depends on your perspective. But after reading near-death experiences where people get tours of the universe and meet angels and Jesus, it's not on that level. But all these little things that happen to people on a regular basis, they happen all the time. And if you just start talking to people about this stuff, I think you will find a lot of people will have had some sort of spiritual experience. It might be a minor thing, but it's still that significant to them. And I was talking to this lady yesterday, and she was saying when she was younger, she went to a church one day, had no real inclination to get baptized, and then she just suddenly heard a voice and felt drawn to say to the minister or pastor, look, I want to get baptized, and was baptized soon after that. And she just felt this awe and wonder feeling as this process in her decision making was taking place. So although you don't have to have a huge experience like a lot of people do that I read out, like these out of body spiritually transformative experiences, if you pay close attention to what is going on in your life in terms of what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, I think you'll find the universe is communicating with you. You just have to pay a little bit more attention, or ask the universe to be a little bit more clear as to your connection. And I listen to these other podcasts where I hear pastors and ministers talk about this connection with God, like we all have it and it's all normal. Well, for me, it wasn't normal. I didn't even realize there was a God up until a few years ago. So if you haven't got that connection and you don't know what I'm talking about, look, I totally understand that. And your relationship and your connection with God, the universe, your higher self, whatever you want to call it, is going to be a unique thing to you. And I can only give you little pointers as to how it happens to me. Synchronicity is one. It's just a personal thing, and you'll know when it's happening. But all you can do, I guess, or my best advice would be, if you want this connection, and it can only be a good thing if you do have it, is to just keep asking for it and keep asking for it to be a little bit more clear if you can't see it. Just keep praying or talking to your higher power, whatever you want to do. It doesn't have to be words out loud. The universe can definitely hear your thoughts. I promise you that much, because I can vouch for that myself. Let's leave it at that. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening. I hope your spiritual journey is evolving rapidly and you're continuing to grow in your love and connection to everything that is. I'll talk to you next week. Lots of love. Love you. Goodbye.